And a very warm welcome to the LBC Book Club. We're here with you until 10 o'clock. I've got Philip Eade. He's written a book called Young Prince Philip, His Turbulent Early Life. Very handsome cover, a very nice picture of Prince Philip on the front. £25, hardback, published by The Harper. Now, Philip Eade, let's start with you, your book about Prince Philip. When you walked into the studio, I was expecting someone a little older. I don't know why I was. I just thought, well, somebody who's writing about Prince Philip will be sort of a little older than you clearly are. What made you want to write about Prince Philip, and particularly his early life?
Well, I never thought that I would write a book about a member of the royal family. I mean, I didn't grow up with an extensive fascination with them. It was a complete sort of accident. After I finished my last book, I was casting around for subjects, and I hit upon a possibly crazy idea to write about the interest in flying saucers and UFOs in the period after the Second World War, and in particular how so many members of the establishment seemed to believe in these things and thought we were being invaded, which perhaps we were. Senior members of the RAF and whatnot. Anyway, Prince Philip was going to be a minor, one of the characters in this book, because as it transpired, he subscribed to saucers. Well, he did actually. Yes,
really?
he subscribed to Flying Saucer Review. He had an equerry, that's to say, a sort of aide, who used to go off at the prince's bidding to interview people who'd seen these things. He once went off to a house in Ealing where he claimed to have met an extraterrestrial humanoid. And other people were asked back to the palace, and the equerry later recounted in his memoirs that the idea was to put them on the spot in the presence of royalty, which was deemed to be as effective as truth serum. So it was to smoke them out, really, see whether they were telling the truth. Anyway, so that was my first sort of first thing that got me interested in Prince Philip, and then when my agent, possibly very sensibly, tried to steer me away from this UFO idea, I sort of learned enough about him to see that his early life was an extraordinary story, and it hadn't really been told properly before, and a lot has come out really since any other books on him. Well, there was one 6 years ago by Giles Brandreth, but that concentrated really on his marriage to the Queen. So I wanted to concentrate on, as I put it in the subtitle, his turbulent early life.
And just how turbulent was it?
Well, it was incredibly sort of traumatic in lots of ways. I mean, as a couple of the reviewers who read my book commented, it's amazing. I mean, if the same things that had happened to him happened to anyone now, he would have either been taken into care by the social services or else spent the rest of his life in therapy. He was born in Greece on the island of Corfu on a dining room table, and when he was 18 months old, his father came within an ace of being executed by some revolutionary colonels who were toppling the monarchy, of which his father was a prince. And but they were rescued. His father had the advantage of being the first cousin of George V of England, and so a warship was dispatched to Athens, and they were taken away, and they ended up. They were unwelcome, however, to settle in Britain because the King of Greece was married to a German princess, and during the First World War, excuse me, they'd been neutral. So eventually they settled on the outskirts of Paris. When he was sort of probably 4, his mother started to lose her mental equilibrium. And when he was 8, she had a complete mental breakdown and was forcibly taken away, injected, and taken off to a secure psychiatric clinic. His father, meanwhile, who might have been expected to step into the breach, wandered off to. I mean, he was already traumatized by what had happened to him in the exile from Greece, and he at this point fled with his mistress to the south of France. So Prince Philip was effectively orphaned. And
what age was that?
This was the age of 8.
All right.
So he was thereafter, really, between then and the age of 18 when he joined the Navy, he was basically parcelled out between various relations, colourful relations and often very loving, but nonetheless he never really had his own bedroom. And so when an interviewer asked him years later, what language did he use to speak at home, because he came from this sort of pan-European heritage, he sort of was rather sort of tetchy, and he sort of said, what do you mean at home? Because he had no concept of having a home.
Which I suppose was, I don't know, maybe that was more common in those days than it is now.
Well, I think most people, I think few people had such a sort of disparate set of, in loco parents. I mean, he had a series of people who fulfilled that role after his own parents, the grandmother, one uncle, and that uncle died, and then another uncle, Louis Mountbatten, the second one. And there were lots of other sort of traumas that came along afterwards. His favourite sister, was killed in an air crash along with her husband and 2 young children on the way to a family wedding in 1937. And that's actually one of the images in my book, is Prince Philip in his civilian suit, aged 15, I think he was, marching through the streets of Darmstadt, where all the crowd are giving the Heil Hitler salute, and he's surrounded on either side by his brothers-in-law. One of them's wearing the SS uniform, and others wearing the SA uniform. And it was this occasion also was the first time his parents had seen each other for 6 or 7 years since his mother had been committed. So it was a sort of things like this were very, 10 years after that, exactly, almost to the day, he married Princess Elizabeth, as she was. And in some ways, it was, although he was born royal, and in some ways it was the poor relation who'd had this amazingly, I'm trying to think of a different word for turbulent, but he had an amazingly turbulent early life.
And you talk about him being dashing and charming. How did he take on this sort of this dashing, charming character in his mid to late teenage years, having had such a traumatic childhood? Because you could imagine him being quite disturbed.
Well, I'm not a professional psychologist, so I did consult one, and I talked to Oliver James, who is a sort of professional psychologist, child psychologist. He rather, I think one of the crucial things in his favour was that he had felt, as a very young boy, very loved by his 2 parents. So that would have, to some extent, insulated him against these blows that he suffered. But nonetheless, having the whole sort of family sort of network ripped apart when he was 8, I think did make him, psychologists would say, into this sort of highly defended personality, whereby he shuts off all emotion and develops this sort of charming persona, which he had anyway. I think he was a very resilient character, and so he was very he was very capable. He was very handsome, and I think he was very capable of getting on with people, and he was sort of naturally boisterous. But the only thing that was, or the thing that was unusual and noticeable to people was his, that he was a little, I think, regarded as a little bit of a cold fish in some ways, and wasn't very good at showing or demonstrating emotion, I think.
I mean, you say he had emotional shortcomings. How did they manifest themselves?
Well, I think, when he was courting the future queen, for example, I think a lot of the people, the courtiers, the sort of staffier courtiers, who anyway regarded him with suspicion because of his German links, and also he was slightly, as they would see it, disrespectful to the whole sort of snobby atmosphere. Also thought that he they wondered really whether he was in love with her, because he seemed to be a bit offhand, and but I think the letters that he wrote, and which have came to light in the authorised biography of the Queen Mother in particular, show that he did, when he was writing it down on paper, he really did feel very strongly towards his future wife. And it's just that I think around people he didn't made it look as though he wasn't.
Well, that's the voice of Philip Eade. He's the author of Young Prince Philip, His Turbulent Early Life. It's published in hardback at £25. We'll be hearing more from him in just a little while. And Philip Eade, who's written Young Prince Philip, His Turbulent Early Life. Philip, let's come back to you. How did Prince Philip and the Queen, or Princess Elizabeth as she then was, how did they first meet?
Well, I think they actually first met, not that they would have known it, at the time, in 1934, at the wedding of the Duke of Kent. And so
the Queen would have been, 9 years old then?
The Queen would have been, I think, 8, and Prince Philip was about 13. And then a much more significant meeting came in 1939, when Prince Philip was a cadet at Dartmouth, and the royal family came to visit Dartmouth Naval College, that is, came to visit the Naval College, which at the time was in there was a mumps outbreak going on, and the two young princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, were 13 and 11 at the time, and so everyone was desperate. They didn't catch mumps, so they were sent off to the captain of the college, the headmaster equivalent of the college, to be looked after. And the king's aide de camp, or aide de camp, or however you pronounce it, happened to be Prince Philip's uncle, Louis Mountbatten, who famously had, well, everyone assumes, had conceived this idea that his nephew, who'd had this extraordinary upbringing that I described, would nonetheless make an ideal future consort. So he was detailed to entertain the young princesses at the captain's house, and so he did things like sort of jumping over the tennis. He basically sort of showed off, by the sounds of the account given later, written by their governess, the princess's governess. And Elizabeth was completely smitten with him, and very obviously so. Over the next day, they stayed overnight. But obviously there was no reason why he should have been bowled over by her, because she was 13 at the time, and she was sent to bed in accordance with the nursery schedule at about 7 o'clock in the evening, and was, I think, less physically mature than most girls of her age even. So, for the time being, I don't think there was any register on his part, but from that day on, as far as she was concerned, he was the one.
So when did the relationship first start?
Well, the relationship it went during the first bit of the war. Prince Philip went out with a girl called Osla Benning, a Canadian debutante. I mean, I think they were fairly serious about each other, and he gave her his naval cipher, which is a sort of brooch, which she was seen to be wearing. I mean, their relationship's never been. She's always mentioned, but just by name in previous books, and I luckily tracked down her daughter and two close friends who could fill in the whole story of their romance. But anyway, by sort of 1943, end of 1943, that was on the wane, it seems, and Prince Philip went to stay at Windsor Castle for Christmas, and so Elizabeth at that time was sort of 15 or so. Have I got that right? No, but 17, I think.
According to the King's speech film, they always went to Sandringham for Christmas during the war.
they were at Windsor definitely in 1943. Perhaps they got that wrong.
Dramatic license, I think.
This seems to have been the turning point. What went on over the sort of few days, there were games of murder in the dark, and anyway, it seemed that
spin the bottle.
Anyway, then Prince Philip went off again. He was in the Navy during the war. He had a very sort of good war, as they say, and lots of action and mentioned dispatches. There was time in Australia, and there's talk of other girls who he took out and whatnot. But I think all the time he was writing to Elizabeth, and when he came back, that's really when the sort of thing started to become more. It sort of took off, and
But I mean, when you say took off, I mean, what does that mean? Because you try and put yourself in the position of Prince Philip, and you're sort of going out with the woman who will be Queen of England. I mean, what's the etiquette there? I mean, when do you decide when to have your first snog?
Well, I don't know, and history doesn't relate when
well, I was
when
hoping
that
to find
happened,
that out in your book, Philip. To be honest.
Well, I can't claim to have I can't claim to have pinpointed that, but I mean, I think it was clear. I think it became clear to a lot of people. There were various observations in the book that around what happened in this Christmas of 1943, and then on subsequent occasions when they met. And people were beginning to talk about them as but as I said, he wasn't especially demonstrative. So even though the sort of behind the scenes, the courtship was entering a bolder phase, a lot of people wouldn't have known it necessarily.
I mean, when you embark on writing a book like this, which is about a specific period of someone's life, but it's titled The Early Years. How do you do the research? Because presumably you didn't get any cooperation from him.
No, but I mean, I had a certain amount of cooperation from his. I did. I mean, I asked for a meeting with him, and I was told right from the start, that my chances were less than zero. However, in order to make the book authoritative, I wanted to talk to as many people close to him, and they would obviously say, well, what does Prince Philip think? So I needed the cooperation of his office, and then not shortly afterwards they just asked me on the telephone news, so of course you'll show us the manuscript, and I was perfectly happy to show them the manuscript, so long as nothing was, they didn't have editorial control. I was perfectly happy to have disputes over facts and whatnot. So we did have a few tussles over that, but I mean, I actually think, and this is obviously a self-serving argument on my part, that especially with someone like Prince Philip, who's not known for wanting to unburden himself about his early life or whatever it is, and he hardly suddenly decide to do so with me, that it's better in a way that I didn't meet him, because I'm not compromised. I didn't meet him and was charmed by him, and then therefore leave out things that might be discreditable to him, or vice versa, take a massive dislike to him and somehow become more hostile because of it.
How did your view of him change between the beginning of the book and by the time you'd finished?
Well, I think it's odd, actually. I didn't really have a sort of it sounds strange, but I didn't really have a view of him at all, really, throughout the whole thing. I felt strangely neutral about it. It was as though I was putting down, it wasn't an extraordinary story, but it wasn't as though this sort of fully formed opinion about his character came out. It was really actually only when I watched I know this sounds very weird, but when I watched the BBC Fiona Bruce interview, and I was expecting him to be much more difficult than he was. I know a lot of people thought he was very difficult, but I think my expectations were. And, I liked him a lot more than I expected to be honest. But I think when I was putting all this down, I thought, there's definitely a lot of respect there, but he was not someone I necessarily thought would be, someone I'd want to sit next to, or want to be in the line of fire.
I'll tell you what, I would, if I had to sit next to someone at a dinner, I think he would be a fascinating person to
No, he
sit
probably
next to.
would. I think if you got him on good form, he would obviously be riveting to sit next to. You just wouldn't want him, in a bad mood with you, perhaps.
No, this is very true. That was the voice of Philip Eade. He is the author of Young Prince Philip, His Turbulent Early Life, published by Harper Press in hardback at £25.